How does the quietest voice in television history force a billion-dollar burger empire to yank its ad overnight, silence a hate group that tried to mimic him, and still refuse the one deal that could have made him rich beyond imagination? The answer begins with a single rule. Fred Rogers swore he'd never break, and the moment he almost walked away from TV forever. Fred Rogers built an entire neighborhood out of gentleness. But beneath the soft smile was a fighter who used courtesy like a crowbar. One polite phone call to Burger King erased a nationwide campaign that twisted his image for profit. Another swift legal strike stopped the KKK from slipping racist poison into children's phone lines. Yet neither battle shook him as much as the day producers asked him to cross his personal red line. That request dragged the mild-mannered minister to the edge of quitting his life's work and set the stage for one of the greatest comeback stories in broadcasting. Stick around, because the real drama of Mr. Rogers starts where the cardigan ends. He never raised his voice, yet multinationals and hate groups backed down. In 1984, Burger King launched a cheerful TV spot starring Mr. Rodney, a cardigan-clad lookalike who chirped about Whoppers. Viewers laughed, until Fred Rogers quietly dialed the chain's vice president. One gentle reminder that kids might confuse parody for endorsement, and the $150,000 campaign vanished from every screen overnight. 6 years later, the stakes were darker. A Missouri Klan chapter set up a telephone hotline where a counterfeit Rogers voice spoon-fed children vicious slurs. Within hours of discovering the scam, Rogers' company filed suit. A federal judge slapped the KKK with an emergency order: cease, surrender every tape, and never imitate the neighborhood again. The hate line went dead before the week was out. One polite phone call, one swift injunction, no shouting, no public feud. Rogers guarded the trust of children like a fortress, proving courtesy can swing a heavier hammer than rage. But that quiet fire was forged long before boardrooms and courtrooms, back when a lonely boy stared out a second-story window, aching to belong. Fred Rogers grew up in a stately brick house in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, surrounded by books, music, and every toy a child could want, but not by playmates. Severe asthma kept him indoors for weeks at a time, so he passed long afternoons talking to handmade puppets and plinking melodies on a tiny piano, watching neighborhood games from behind the glass. The wealth that cushioned his body only sharpened the ache of isolation. When he finally ventured outside, the welcome was brutal. Classmates mocked his weight, chanting "Fat Freddy," and, according to family lore, once chased him 11 blocks until he gasped for air and hid in tears. That humiliation lodged deep, convincing him that cruelty is loud, but pain is often silent. Years later, he would face a TV camera and speak to millions of kids the way no one had spoken to him then. One voice did cut through the loneliness: his grandfather, Fred McFeely. Every Sunday on the family farm, the older Fred wrapped an arm around the shy boy and said, "Freddie, you make my day very special just by being you." Those 13 words, "I like you just the way you are," became the heartbeat of an entire television neighborhood. So the cardigan's calm began not in comfort, but in discomfort. The bullied, wheezing child learned to read feelings the way some kids read comic books, and he stored that knowledge for the day he could hand it back as kindness. Next up, the moment a college prodigy in Florida saw a pie-in-the-face gag on live TV and decided to hijack an industry. By senior year at Rollins College, Fred Rogers had composed more than 200 pieces of music, and was certain he'd head straight to seminary after graduation. Then, during Easter break of 1951, he saw his first television set flicker to life in his parents' living room, and felt sick. Pies flew into faces, jokes mocked the audience's intelligence, and something inside him snapped. "After watching people throw pies, I decided right then to get into television, because I hated it so," he later confessed. Diploma in hand, magna cum laude, Bachelor of Music Composition, the 23-year-old marched to New York City, not to perform, but to infiltrate. NBC put him behind the curtain of live behemoths like Your Hit Parade and The Voice of Firestone, where he cued props, hustled scenery, and watched sponsors dictate every creative choice. The harder the ratings race-pushed slapstick and sugar-crusted ads at children, the more certain he became that TV needed a conscience. After 2 whirlwind years and 1 too many cereal jingles, Rogers walked away from commercial television, trading Manhattan studios for a drafty Pittsburgh mansion that housed WQED, America's first community-funded station. At the same time, he enrolled at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary and began weekly sessions with child development guru Dr. Margaret McFarland. Media, ministry, and psychology weren't an obvious trio, but Rogers believed children deserved all 3 in a single package: beautiful music, thoughtful storytelling, and emotional truth. Those 8 years scurrying between control rooms, classrooms, and church pews forged the quiet insurgent who would soon build a neighborhood, then use it to upend an industry. Next, we'll step into that unheated WQED studio, where a lone camera, a borrowed tiger puppet, and a hand-knit cardigan sparked a revolution in children's television. The studio was a converted mansion in Pittsburgh that leaked winter air and rattled with every passing trolley. But Fred Rogers saw a blank canvas. In 1953, he slipped behind an upright organ at fledgling WQED, coaxed a tiger puppet named Daniel to life, and spun 5 minutes of filler into a full-blown universe. One season later, the Children's Corner, staffed by a crew you could fit in a station wagon, beat out corporate giants to win the 1955 Sylvania Award for Best Local Children's Show. Yet, Rogers still refused to step in front of the camera. It took another first-of-its-kind moment to change that. In 1963, the Presbyterian Church ordained him specifically to minister to children and families through television. A collar wasn't necessary. A lens would be his pulpit. With a mandate in hand, he brought a 15-minute Canadian prototype home, stitched the neighborhood of make-believe to everyday living room rituals, and, thanks to a quiet grant from the Sears Roebuck Foundation, launched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood nationwide on February 19, 1968. Viewers expected bright colors and slapstick. Rogers gave them deliberate silence, jazz that breathed, and a cardigan knitted by his mother. Children leaned toward the screen because, for once, television leaned toward them. Adults took notice the next spring. On May 1, 1969, Rogers sat before a skeptical U.S. Senate and, with 6 minutes of gentle testimony, flipped Senator John Pastore from budget cutter to champion, preserving the full $20 million for public broadcasting. 8 days later, he broke another barrier inside his own program, sharing a wading pool, and then the same towel with Officer Francois Clemens, a black actor, at a time when many public pools were still segregated. The scene needed no lecture. The water said everything. From a drafty mansion to national airwaves, Rogers proved that kindness could be engineered as meticulously as any network spectacle. But tranquility was only the storefront. Behind the picket fence, he was already preparing for fights no children's show had dared to wage. Fred Rogers flat out refused to turn children into shoppers. While rival shows inked multi-million-dollar serial tie-ins and action figure lines, he vetoed every merchandising pitch that reached his desk, insisting the neighborhood remain the one place on television where you don't have to buy anything to belong. When others hijacked his likeness anyway, he protected that trust with velvet-gloved ferocity. In 1998, he sued a mall chain for selling t-shirts that showed Mr. Rogers brandishing a pistol beside the slogan, "Welcome to my hood," demanding every shirt be destroyed. The message landed. Parody was fair game. Profiteering at kids' expense was not. His personal habits mirrored the principle. A lifelong vegetarian, he would smile and say, "I don't eat anything that had a mother," quietly omitting meat from every on-camera meal. Even treats were modest. Just a splash of Kahlua over ice cream on rare evenings. Discipline bordered on ritual. For 3 decades, he kept his weight locked at exactly 143 pounds. Numerical shorthand for, "I love you." 1, 4, 3. Pennsylvania eventually declared the 143rd day of the year an official statewide Day of Kindness in his honor. The routine behind that number was equally precise. Up before dawn, 20 laps in the pool, prayer, a caffeine-free breakfast, he swapped coffee for postum, lights out by 9:30 p.m., all to ensure he greeted viewers with a clear mind and steady spirit. Yet the set was anything but austere. Crew members once replaced his sneakers with child-sized prank shoes, and he laughed so hard he missed his musical cue. Another time, he blew up a mischievous photo into a giant Christmas poster for the culprit. The cardigan concealed a rebel who proved that playful joy and fierce principle can share the same quiet heartbeat. No children's show host has attracted more outlandish legends. TikTok clips resurfaced this spring claiming Fred Rogers was a decorated Navy SEAL sniper who hid sleevefuls of combat tattoos beneath those cardigans. Rumors suggest the myth caught fire online because the contrast felt irresistible. But it's pure fiction, a tale traced by screenwriters back to a late 90s email hoax and debunked yet again in 2025 roundups. Other chatter focuses on politics. Rogers registered Republican in the 1970s, yet his widow Joanne told Newsweek that Donald Trump's values were almost completely opposite of Fred's gentle ethos, sparking fresh partisan debate in 2020 that still flares whenever kindness trends on social media. Reports claim she believed Fred would have spoken out had he lived to see the current climate, an opinion, not a manifesto, but one that keeps commentators guessing which banner the cardigan would choose today. Then there's the painful story of Officer Francois Clemens. Memoirs and interviews confirm that in 1968, Rogers asked his black, gay co-star to keep his sexuality private, a demand framed by industry fear that sponsors might flee. Clemens writes that Rogers later apologized and embraced his partners, a quiet evolution that complicates the saintly image while underscoring his capacity to grow. Each rumor, allegation, or late-breaking hot take circles the same paradox: a man celebrated for unwavering principles who was also human enough to change. And for every myth exposed, another pops up, proof that in 2025, the neighborhood's soft voice still echoes loudly enough for the internet to argue over the real Mr. Rogers. The neighborhood's curtain fell on August 31st, 2001, with a quiet, art-themed episode that never hinted it was the end. Fred simply waved, promised, "We'll be able to visit tomorrow," and stepped through the door, knowing there would be no tomorrow on screen. 11 days later, the Twin Towers fell, and the country reached for the familiar cardigan. Rogers came back, not with a new show, but with a homemade PSA filmed in his living room. He reminded viewers, children and adults alike, to look for the helpers, a single sentence that steadied millions in the chaos of 9/11. That would be his final encore. By December 2002, doctors found aggressive stomach cancer. Surgery in January bought him weeks, not years. On February 27, 2003, one day after his grandson's birthday, Fred Rogers died at home in Pittsburgh, surrounded by family. He was 74. The farewell only amplified his voice. Won't You Be My Neighbor, 2018, shattered documentary box office records, drawing $22 million from audiences hungry for real-life heroes. The next year, Tom Hanks's A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood carried the story worldwide, earning nearly $68 million and an Oscar nomination for Kindness itself. Rogers keeps resurfacing. Pluto TV started a 24/7 neighborhood stream in 2024. TikTok clips of his 9/11 words still trend during every crisis. This June, Latrobe will host the 2025 Work of Fred Rogers Conference and a week-long Family Days festival, proof that the cardigan still draws a crowd decades after its wearer is gone. He scripted his exit as carefully as any episode: an art celebration, a whispered thanks, and one last reminder that you are special just by being you. Even in goodbye, Fred Rogers left the door cracked open, inviting every generation that follows to step inside and keep the neighborhood alive. Fred Rogers never needed a catchphrase louder than, "I like you just the way you are." With that single promise, he faced bullies, advertisers, even white-robed hate-mongers, and won every time. The Burger King campaign folded, the KKK hotline went silent, and a t-shirt with a gun vanished overnight. Yet the one fight he refused was the richest offer of all, turning his image into merchandise. He would not sell childhood trust for profit. That was the red line, and it kept the neighborhood clean for more than 3 decades. Look back, and the pattern is clear. Isolation taught him empathy, music taught him rhythm, ministry taught him purpose, and television became the unlikely megaphone that carried it all. His most powerful weapons were courtesy and consistency: a morning swim, a song at the door, a cardigan sewn by his mother. They built a ritual children could depend on in a world that rarely keeps its promises. So what does a red sweater from 1968 have to do with us in 2025? Everything, because algorithms still chase outrage, hoaxes still dress up as heroes, and kids still need one corner of the screen where kindness isn't for sale. Rogers showed that gentleness scaled to millions once before. Our challenge is to make sure it does again. One clip, one classroom, one helper at a time. He closed every episode the same way, and the words still stand: "You've made this day a special day, just by your being you."